We're talking about all the big themes coming out of Flame 2018, and I'm really pleased that I've got Bas Eickhout with me now. Bas is a member of the European Parliament from the Dutch Green Party. Thank you very much for your time here at Flame.
Thank you for having me.
Just outline the position, if you could, from the European Green Parties of the way you approach gas. Is it a friend or foe in the mix to you?
It's a double answer, I fear. Almost political, isn't it?
Very political.
No, I do think that we as Greens acknowledge that in the transition to clean energy, you need gas, and gas is a cleaner fossil fuel than, for example, coal. However, if you really look into 1, 2, 3 decades, I do think that we have to get rid of fossil fuels entirely, which also means a phase out of at least natural gas, fossil gas. Of course, you can think of some of the alternatives, green gas, biogas, but those numbers will be much smaller. So if you look at the infrastructure that we are building for gas as Europe right now, we're very critical because we fear a fossil lock-in on gas. And I think that's where we do see the potential, but it is a medium term and we don't want to be locked in. And somewhere the industry, well, they are a bit lobbying for more and more infrastructure, probably hoping for that lock-in. And I think then it becomes a foe.
Well, can you put a time frame on it?
Sure.
Just,
I think we've done our own analysis and scenarios, and there you see that in a way the gas consumption of Europe, we don't expect it to increase very much. And after 2030 already will go down substantially by almost going to zero in 2050. So that's really talking about 35 years. So building new infrastructure, to our assessment, is not really needed.
So, but what do you see as being the balance in a very seasonal structure of renewables? If we're looking at sun and wind, it's the cliche, but the sun doesn't always shine, etc.
Sure.
So what do you see as the balance there instead? I mean, surely gas fits perfectly into that mix.
Yeah, well, the problem, of course, is gas is still a fossil fuel. So if you burn gas, you are emitting a lot of CO2, and we know that we need to be CO2 neutral by 2050. So that means the question really is gas the one that we need to balance it out, or do we need to invest in infrastructure around electricity? You can also store electricity. You can have a good infrastructure which is balancing out all the different forms of renewables. So yes, for sure, now we need gas, but in 30 years, much of that balancing out can be done in a infrastructure of renewable electricity.
Okay, well, what about some of the putting money into infrastructure with CCS, carbon capture and storage, and
Sure.
actually going down those lines instead?
Well, I think it is part of the mix, but it will be a small part because gas will become very expensive as soon as you go to CCS. We see it already is that many of these CCS projects have not been very successful, and quite often it's because economically it doesn't make sense. I do know that some of the heavy industry probably will keep on needing gas, and there we have to think of CCS, but that's for a very specific application. I don't really see that CCS and gas is a economical viable option for the long term if you just use it for energy. I think then the alternatives will be cheaper.
Okay, let's talk about the Groningen field.
Sure.
How much of a challenge is that for Norway? For actually what looks like the lack of gas now within the market. Well, not the lack, but the decrease of gas because of that.
I think it has become a huge debate, and I think a bit late on in the discussion. I think the Netherlands, in our country, we have been a bit spoiled by this gas supply in Groningen. So there was hardly any gas or energy discussion. And now suddenly that came up, and politically they were forced to cut it down and in a very fast rate. I think that is putting challenges to all of us, and preferably, of course, you would have seen that much earlier on, that discussion also for the alternatives and also for the entire European supply. But looking at the total consumption of Europe, I think there you don't have to fear much, because if you now look at the current consumption, infrastructure for import is already overachieving that. So in that sense, for the time being, we are safe on gas, but of course we will have to think of what kind of efficiency policies need to be in place in order to waste less gas.
Do you think those policies need to be driven by individual governments, or do you think it's more of a public opinion, or do you think actually, given the pricing, the flexibility at the moment of pricing, actually the market will decide?
I don't think the market will decide. I think at the political level you have to push it in a certain direction. If you leave it to the market will very long sit on where it's convenient, and that's of course a business as usual and just doing what you're doing now. So I think with policies you can put in standards, you can put in efficiency policies, which is pushing our energy use consumption into a certain direction. I think that should be European. We're talking about one European energy market. You are already seeing too many national decisions in creating infrastructure, which is in the end economically not viable. So I think European policies need to be in place, and of course then the market will deliver, but that needs to be pushed into a certain direction, and therefore we have invited politicians, I'm sorry.
Let's just say we're standing here 1 year from now.
Sure.
What would we be talking about? What would you like us to be talking about?
Well, I really would like to talk about an honest discussion of the gas sector on how they see the volumes that are needed for European consumption on the longer term, and I'm talking about the next decades, and in what phase we can phase out, and how then the remaining fossil fuel can be replaced by biogas, or how CCS will put in that picture. I hear too often two general statements of the industry, which is more or less putting, the gas interest at front. I want to see the numbers.
This is a gas conference.
Yeah, sure. But I think in the end, if everyone is talking about, gas is a great ally for renewables and our low carbon future, well, the low carbon future needs to be zero by 2050. So how do the numbers add up? I want to have an honest discussion there, and there I'm challenging the industry to come up with an honest discussion with the right numbers, and then also really the fair question, how much infrastructure additionally do you really need? And my answer would be hardly any, and I think that is still a statement that I haven't heard from the gas industry.
When you're here at Flame, you're here for the next few days?
I'll be here today.
Okay, so do you have meetings set up with people, or are you just here to listen?
Usually how it goes is when you are in such a panel and you are a bit challenging the different panelists, probably then the meetings fill in.
Happened afterwards.
The meetings fill in afterwards, automatically.
Bas, thank you very much for speaking to us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and have a great time at Flame.
I will, thanks.
Thank you.